The carver of the drowned, they say the ocean remembers. It keeps what it takes, bones, whispers, and the names of those who disobeyed its hunger. 17 centuries ago, in a fishing village that no longer exists on any map, the tide brought something to shore. Something that shouldn't have floated. The storm had raged for 7 days. On the 8th, the sea fell silent, and a piece of driftwood the color of old blood washed up near the village of Sannan, on the coast of what is now Brunei. It was smooth as bone, heavy as a corpse. When the villagers touched it, the wood felt warm and alive. Ratu, the village carver, found it first. He was a quiet man, widowed young, known for carving guardian idols, small woodman figures placed at doorways to protect homes from sea spirits. His wife had drowned the year before. Her body was never found. The fisherman whispered that the sea had taken her because Ratu had carved too many idols, shielding others while neglecting his own. When he saw the driftwood, Ratu claimed it for himself. He dragged it to his hut and began to carve. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He told no one what he was making. Only that the wood spoke to him, in bubbles and murmurs, like waves beneath his floorboards. For days, he worked by candlelight, his blade slicing curves and teeth into the wood surface. Then one night, the candle went out. A fisherman named Taha said he saw Ratu's hut glowing from within, the color of moonlight through water. He heard whispering, not in a man's voice, not even human. When dawn came, Ratu emerged from his hut with a small figure in his hands. It was a doll, but not like any idol he'd carved before. Its face was stretched and strange, a grin carved to wide, with rows of sharp wooden teeth. Its eyes were hollow, but in the sunlight they shimmered like fish scales. Its body was thin, its hands long and curved like claws. When the villagers asked what it was, Ratu said only, "It is Labubu, the one who listens." That night, the sea came further inland than anyone remembered. The waves licked the edges of the village, swallowing the footprints in the sand. A child went missing. Then another. Ratu said nothing. He sat in his hut with the doll, whispering to it. Those who passed by claimed they saw it move, its head turning toward them, its grin somehow wider in the dark. On the 7th night, the sea rose again, black and full of light. The villagers gathered with torches, demanding Ratu destroy the doll. He refused. They broke down his door. Inside, Ratu was gone. The doll sat in the center of the room, wet as though it had just come from the ocean. When one of the men reached for it, he screamed. Salt water poured from his eyes and mouth until he drowned on dry land. The others fled, leaving the hut to burn. In the morning, there was nothing left but ash. And the doll. The elders buried it deep in the mangrove roots near the shore, hoping the tide would never find it again. But sometimes, when storms rolled in, they swore they could still hear the waves whispering that name, Labubu. Centuries later, the coastline shifted. The old village vanished. But the tides don't forget. And one night, in 2025, when a collector of rare folklore artifacts purchased a strange wooden doll found near a collapsed shoreline, he thought he'd discovered a treasure. He didn't know that what he held wasn't carved from driftwood at all. It was grown from the body of the first one the sea took. The awakening. When he unwrapped the parcel, the first thing he noticed was the smell. Not the usual scent of old wood or dust, but salt, thick, metallic, like the air before a storm. Elias Morton was not a superstitious man. He was an academic, a historian of Southeast Asian folklore at King's College, London. For him, ancient artifacts were nothing more than windows into forgotten belief systems. Superstition preserved in wood, clay, or parchment. The note inside the parcel intrigued him, found near Kampongmyer, Borneo. Estimated 4th century origin. Believed to be a sea guardian effigy, name unknown. But Elias knew the name. He had seen it before, a single word scribbled in a half-burnt manuscript from the 1800s. Labubu. He placed the doll on his study desk beneath a pool of lamplight. The carving was exquisite, the grin stretched to unnatural length, the sharp teeth etched with inhuman precision. It looked both ancient and freshly made, as though time had forgotten to decay it. The grain of the wood shimmered faintly, almost as if it were wet. He ran his thumb along its head and drew back sharply. It was warm. That night, as he documented his notes, Elias swore he heard dripping. He checked the ceiling, dry. Checked the floor, clean. When he turned back, the doll was no longer facing forward. It had turned slightly, toward him. He laughed uneasily, blaming the draft. The house was old, and the storm outside howled like a living thing. Still, when he went to bed, he left the study door closed and locked. At 3:11 a.m., his phone vibrated. No message, just the faint sound of water in the background of the ringtone. Then a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable, a voice childlike, gurgling, somewhere between laughter and drowning. "Mama," he froze. The word replayed, distorted, stretching across the line like a current. Then silence. When he entered his study the next morning, the doll was gone from the desk. A small puddle had formed beneath the chair, faintly cloudy, like seawater. He searched everywhere, behind books, beneath furniture, inside drawers. He found it finally, sitting on the windowsill, its hollow eyes staring at the grey sky. That evening, he took it to the museum for examination. He presented it to Dr. Hansu, an archaeologist from Singapore specializing in maritime artifacts. Han was skeptical. 4th century, maybe. But the detailing, it's too modern. The tools used here are too precise. Then how do you explain the texture? Elias asked. Look at the grain. Feel it. Han hesitated, then placed a hand on the doll. He frowned. It's soft, he said. Like skin, Elias said. It's wood. Han shook his head slowly. No, this isn't any wood I've seen. Later, while Elias was driving home, Han stayed behind to take samples. He sent Elias a photo message an hour later. It showed the doll on the lab table, under ultraviolet light. The message read, "There's something carved under the surface, letters. It looks like names." Then, 10 minutes later, another message came through. Only one word, "help." Elias tried calling, but the line was static. When he arrived back at the lab, the lights were flickering. The door to the research room was open, and the floor was wet. Inside, the doll sat alone on the table. Han was gone. The security footage later showed only one frame worth noticing, a blur of movement near the camera, the sound of rushing water, and a small shadow climbing onto the table. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat in the dark with the doll on the far side of the room, unable to stop staring at it. The whisper returned, this time from the corner. The water's cold. He turned the light on. Nothing there. But when he looked at the doll again, He saw something new. Its mouth was wider. There was something stuck between its teeth. A single black-hair human. Elias began to realize this wasn't just an artifact. It was a survivor. A relic of something that had never stopped breathing beneath the tide. Something that waited centuries for someone to bring it back into the world of air and light. And now, it was awake. The next morning, Elias could barely lift his head. He had not slept, not even for a minute. The whispering came and went through the night, sometimes from the corners, sometimes from inside the walls. Every time he tried to record it, the microphone captured only one thing: water. A soft, rolling, endless tide. He thought he was losing his mind. But the message from Dr. Han was real. The photo of the doll under UV light showed faintly glowing letters carved beneath the surface, not visible to the eye, only through exposure. Names. Elias printed the image and examined it under a magnifier. They weren't written in any modern script. They were scratched into the grain, twisting, looping, ancient. Yet he could make out faint syllables that looked almost human. Rana Sol, and one more, near the base, half erased, half emerging from the wood like it was being written slowly, day by day. He stopped breathing. He dropped the photo, staring at the doll on his desk. Its grin seemed deeper now, the lips more defined, the teeth sharper. He felt the room tilt. When he blinked, he saw the faintest trail of moisture leading from the doll to the floor, like a thin river winding toward him. He stood, chair scraping violently against the wood. He stepped back, heart pounding. But when he looked again, the water was gone. Dry floor, still air, only the doll. Elias decided to burn it. He didn't care what history it held, what potential research value it carried. It wasn't worth this madness. He stuffed it into a metal bin and doused it with lighter fluid. When the match touched, the flame caught instantly, bright, hungry. For a second, relief washed through him. The grin disappeared in smoke. Then the fire hissed, like something had inhaled. The flame turned blue, then green. The air grew wet, suffocating. The windows fogged over with condensation. Elias stumbled back, coughing. When the smoke cleared, the doll was still there, unburned. Only its eyes had changed. They were no longer hollow, now. They gleamed, as though filled with seawater. That night, Elias sought help from a local folklorist, Dr. Noah, who specialized in maritime curses. She agreed to meet him at her home outside London, a small cottage that smelled of jasmine and damp earth. When she saw the doll, her face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. He told her everything, the parcel, the photo, Hans' disappearance. Nor listened, silent, until he mentioned the names. She looked at him sharply. "Names, yes. Carved beneath the wood. I think one is mine." Her hands trembled as she opened an old book, Curses of the Archipelago. She flipped through pages until she found a small illustration, a child-sized effigy with sharp teeth, labeled in faded ink, Labubu, the listener of the drowned. Below it, a note written in older script. "When the sea takes the living, it carves their name into the keeper. When the list is complete, the tide will come for the last one." Nor looked at him. "If your name is appearing, Elias, it means the sea remembers you. You've been marked." He laughed bitterly. But the sound came out hollow. "I'm not dead." "Not yet," she said softly. "But something out there thinks you should be." Before Elias could respond, the lights flickered. The faint smell of salt filled the air. The floorboards creaked like waves shifting underfoot. Nora's eyes widened. She turned to her window. Beyond the glass, the world was dark, but the reflection of the doll was visible in the pane. Even though it sat on the table between them, its reflection smiled wider. Its eyes glowed faintly blue. A drop of water hit the table. Then another. The temperature plummeted. Elias stood frozen as Nor whispered an old prayer. But it didn't help. The doll tilted its head slightly, and a faint voice echoed from somewhere far beneath them, muffled, yet clear. "Too deep, can't breathe." The walls of the cottage shuddered. Water seeped from the ceiling, the walls, the cracks in the floorboards. Elias stumbled back as Nor's candles went out. One by one, then silence. When the lights flickered back, Nor was gone. Only the doll remained, sitting on the table, and now there were more letters carved into its chest. The newest one was complete, Elias. The sea returns. Elias didn't remember leaving Doctor Nor's cottage. He only remembered the rain, sheets of it hammering the windshield as he drove, heart pounding, the doll locked in the trunk. The sky was black, though his clock said it was only 4 in the afternoon. By the time he reached his flat, the streets were flooding. Ward lapped at his tires as he parked. He tried not to look in the rearview mirror, but when he did, for just a second, he swore he saw movement. Something small sitting upright in the back seat. He didn't check. He didn't dare inside. He bolted the door and went straight to his desk, flipping through Dr. Nor's book. He needed answers. He needed a way out. But the pages were soaked, the ink bleeding into patterns that looked like waves and faces. He could still smell salt on his hands. It never faded. Then he heard it, a slow creak from the hallway. Not the house settling. Footsteps. He stood, trembling, gripping the desk for a balance. "Who's there?" he called. No response. Only the rhythmic dripping of water, somewhere near the door. When he looked down the hall, the floor was wet. A trail of small, perfect puddles led from the front door to the study. He followed it, slowly, each step sinking slightly, like walking on sand. And there it was, sitting in the middle of the corridor, legs crossed, smiling. The Labubu doll. He'd locked it in the trunk. The water was rising now, pooling round its wooden feet. He reached for it, shaking, but stopped halfway. Something was moving under the surface of the puddle, pale, writhing shapes, like fingers pressing up from below. He stepped back, choking. The whisper returned, faint, liquid, surrounding him. The tide's not done. He turned and ran to the kitchen. He grabbed a hammer, a knife, anything. But when he looked up, the doll was already there, sitting on the counter beside the sink. Elias screamed and struck it. Once, twice, again, splinters flying. When he stopped, panting. It was in pieces. The smile was gone. But then the sink began to fill. The pipes groaned, vomiting salt water, black and bubbling. From the fragments on the floor, something began to move, the pieces of the doll twitching, twisting, dragging themselves toward each other. He stumbled back, slipping, his head cracking against the tiles. The lights flickered out for a moment. He was underwater. He saw it, a vast shape below him, eyes like lanterns, limbs like roots stretching across the dark. 1,000 faces floated there, mouths open in silent screams, all carved into its body, all whispering one word in unison, Labubu. He woke choking on seawater, sprawled on his kitchen floor. The power was gone, but faint moonlight poured through the window. The doll sat whole again on the table. Its teeth were wet. He couldn't stay. He had turned it. Doctor, Nora's notes had mentioned the place of origin, the old village that had vanished into the sea. If he returned it, maybe the curse would end. By dawn, he was on a flight to Brunei. The air was thick with heat when he arrived. The coast had long since eroded. The shoreline shifted miles from where the ancient village once stood. But the locals still spoke of it, Sannan, the drowned place. They warned him not to go near the mangroves at night. He didn't listen. By sunset, he reached the waterline. The tide was low, revealing blackened roots twisting through the mud-like veins. He carried the doll wrapped in cloth, but even through the fabric, he could feel it breathing. The wind fell silent. The air grew cold. He heard faint laughter, children, distant, echoing through the mangroves. He took another step, sinking ankle-deep in the muck. The doll grew heavier. The water began to rise faster than the tide should. Then he saw it, his stone marker jutting from the shore, half buried. Engraved with symbols, the same symbols carved beneath the doll's skin. He knelt and began to dig, shoving aside the wet earth, desperate to bury it again. But beneath the soil, his fingers touched something soft, skin, a hand. It gripped his wrist. Elias screamed, yanking back, stumbling into the rising surf. The water surged round him, pulling at his legs, dragging him toward the sea, the horizon blood, the line between water and sky gone. And through the foam and wind, he saw them, faces rising from the tide, pale, hollow-eyed, smiling. The drowned, each of them whispering, gasping through the waves. The listener hears. He dropped the doll into the surf. For a moment, it sank. Then, slowly, it rose again, upright on the surface, smiling as the water churned round it. The sea roared like thunder. Elias screamed and turned to run. But the last thing he heard before everything went dark was that same soft voice from the first night, calling from the tide. You forgot your name. The last tide. The ocean was calm the next morning. To calm. Fishermen in the small coastal village of Kuala Tutong noticed strange debris floating near the mangroves, torn paper, scraps of fabric, something that looked like part of a suitcase, one of them. An old man named Rafi pulled a bundle from the tide. Inside was a journal, swollen and warped with salt water. The first page was still legible. My name is Elias Morton. If anyone finds this, do not touch the doll. The rest was smeared beyond reading. Only faint lines of black ink bled through, shaped like waves or perhaps something else, letters repeating over and over again. Labubu. Rafi showed the book to the village priest, who told him to throw it back into the sea. But curiosity is a dangerous tide. Instead, he kept it. That night, the ocean's edge began to glow. A doll, greenish light rolling beneath the surface like trapped lightning. The wind stopped completely. Even the insects went silent. Rafi dreamed of a man walking barefoot through water that rose to his chest. The man carried something small. Whispering to it, each time he whispered, the sea rippled outward in answer. When Rafi awoke, his window was open. The journal lay on the floor, dripping wet. And beside it, a doll, the same carved grin, the same hollow eyes, the same faint smell of salt. And rot. He dropped it instantly, heart pounding, and stumbled backward. It hit the ground with a sound that didn't belong to wood. Soft, heavy, like something breathing. He backed out of the room, slamming the door, whispering prayers his mother had taught him as a child. But even through the door, he could hear a dot dripping. and laughter. In the morning, the doll was gone. But the tide had come in higher than it ever had before. The village awoke to find half their homes flooded, and dozens of fish lying dead on the sand. Their mouths opened in silent screams. Rafi's footprints led down to the water's edge. None led back. The locals said the ocean had taken him, but old sailors, those who knew the older stories, whispered that Rafi had only answered a call. The call that comes once every few generations, when the listener grows restless. Weeks later, a shipment arrived at an antique shop in Hong Kong. Among the carved masks and idols was a small wooden figure, catalogued simply as unknown artifact, Brunei origin. The shopkeeper placed it in the front window. Tourists passed by all day, snapping photos, laughing at its airy grin. At closing time, he went to lock the door and paused. He could have sworn he heard something inside the glass. A whisper, so faint he almost didn't catch it. "Mama." He stared at the doll. A single droplet of water ran down its cheek, leaving a salt stain on the wood. That night, he took it home. Just until morning, he told himself. But the tide never really leaves. It only waits for the right shore, and somewhere far below, beneath the black water and shifting sand, the faces of the drowned still stir, whispering that one ancient name again and again, as the sea opens its mouth to breathe. Labubu, the end.